"You think this is hard?" Elias asked, his voice dry, echoing slightly in the hollow metal shell of the derelict cruiser. The air recycler wheezed a rusty tune behind him. He adjusted the feed nozzle, sending a pulse of energy down the manipulator arm towards the fused plating. Sparks flew, miniature suns against the perpetual dimness of the salvage bay. The alien woman, who insisted he call her simply Kale, shifted beside him. Even in the low light filtering from the emergency strips overhead, the subtle bioluminescent tracery beneath her skin pulsed a soft, steady beat. Something Elias had learned indicated calm, or perhaps intense focus. He still wasn't sure which. She was lean, all sharp angles and fluid motion, utterly unlike any human he'd ever encountered. Her form was graceful but held a coiled tension, like a predator ready to strike. She didn't wear clothes, not in any way Elias understood, but her skin had patterns, some inherent, some seemingly applied. They moved sometimes or changed intensity with her mood. It was mesmerizing and distracting. "Harder," she repeated, her voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated against his ribs even from a foot away. "The heat must be higher. It must penetrate the scar." She gestured with a hand that had 3 long, slender fingers and a thumb, nails sharp and dark. A series of lines near her wrist pulsed a brighter blue as she spoke. Elias tried not to stare directly at them. "It's a welding feed, not a medical procedure," he grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his glove. "Any hotter and you risk annealing the structural integrity. This whole section is ancient, probably older than your grandmother." He wasn't sure if her species had grandmothers, or families, or anything remotely human. She was a mystery that had dropped, quite literally, from the sky, well, from a collapsing escape pod he'd snagged before it vaporized in the atmosphere of this forgotten rock. Kale made a sound that might have been annoyance, a low click deep in her throat. Her hand reached out, quick as thought, and closed around his gloved wrist. Her touch was cool, firm. He froze. This was new. Physical contact was rare, usually limited to accidental brushes in the tight confines of the salvage ship, and never initiated by her. "Your pulse quickens," she observed, her voice lower now, a silken rasp. The blue lines on her wrist intensified and new, fainter green ones appeared near his. It felt like a physical question or maybe just observation. He couldn't tell. Her gaze, even in the dim light, felt unnervingly direct, seeing past the grime and weariness on his face. "Just surprised," he managed, trying to keep his voice even. "We usually keep our hands to ourselves, don't we?" A corner of her mouth quirked upwards, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift in the patterns around her lips. "You find my touch unpleasant?" "No," he said too quickly. "Just unexpected and utterly distracting." The low hum of her voice, the subtle scent he couldn't quite identify, something like rain on hot metal and distant ozone, filled the small space between them. He was acutely aware of the press of her fingers against his wrist, the warmth seeping through the thick fabric of his glove. "Good," she said, the single word filled with quiet confidence. Her fingers lingered for another beat, then released him. She stepped back, allowing him space, but the sense of her presence remained, a vibrant hum in the quiet ship. "Now," she commanded, her voice returning to its earlier intensity, the heat. "Increase it. I am not fragile." The blue lines pulsed again, a silent emphasis. "Go harder." Elias stared at the weld site, then back at her. She was watching him, her head tilted slightly. He didn't understand her need for the intense heat. The repair wasn't critical enough to warrant the risk, but he also didn't understand most things about her. She had been cryptic about her past, about her species, about the scar she seemed so intent on repairing with his inadequate tools. He knew she was strong, unnervingly so, and seemed to possess some kind of sensitivity to energy fields. She could sense fluctuations he couldn't even detect with his scanners. He sighed, turning back to the control panel. "All right, fine, but if this whole section collapses, you're explaining it to the wrecking crew." He adjusted the settings, pushing the power feed past the recommended limits. The hum from the manipulator arm grew louder, the sparks brighter, hotter. He felt the heat through his gloves, saw the plating glow an angry red, then a dull orange. Kale didn't flinch. She simply watched, her patterns shifting, a complex, silent language Elias was only beginning to learn to read. He worked in silence for several minutes, focused on keeping the unstable energy feed steady. The metal hissed and groaned under the intense heat. Kale remained beside him, a silent sentinel, her attention fixed entirely on the glowing metal. He could feel her focus, almost like a physical weight in the air. It wasn't uncomfortable, not exactly, but it was intense. Everything about her was intense. When he finally pulled back, shutting off the feed, the air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and ozone. The plating was fused, the seam glowing fiercely. It was a messier weld than he liked, but it was solid. More importantly, it seemed to satisfy Kale. "It holds," she stated, a low, pleased rumble in her chest. The patterns on her skin shifted, a wave of soft yellow spreading across her shoulders and down her arms. Elias guessed that meant satisfaction, maybe relief. "Yeah, it holds," he echoed, flexing his stiff fingers. "Probably, for now." He looked at her, really looked at her in the aftermath of the focused work. The glow beneath her skin seemed to soften, the sharp angles of her face relaxing slightly. She wasn't beautiful in a human way, but there was a stark, compelling grace to her, a raw power that drew the eye, and her presence was soothing in a strange, elemental way. He had spent years alone on this salvage vessel, drifting through the void, talking only to his ship's aging AI and the occasional calm static. Kale's arrival had been a shock, a disruption, but it had also filled a void he hadn't even realized was there. "You are skilled," she said unexpectedly, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were large and dark, seeming to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. They held an ancient, knowing depth that always unsettled him. "Your hands know the metal." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's what I do, been doing it a long time." He was a scavenger, a repairman, a man living on the edges of civilized space. Not exactly a hero. He certainly didn't feel skilled when he was around her, with her strange abilities and cryptic pronouncements. "My kind," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "we touch the world differently. We feel the energy, the flow. Your tools extend your touch, but you do not feel it directly." She reached out again, her fingers hovering just above the still warm plating. A faint shimmer emanated from her fingertips, and the glowing lines on her skin pulsed in time with it. "This metal, it remembers the violence. The scar still hums." Elias just stared. He felt nothing from the metal but residual heat. "Right, hums." He wasn't going to pretend to understand. He was a mechanic, not whatever she was. "Look, I should clean up this site, and I need to check the power core before we make the next jump. We're running low on reserves." "The power core," she repeated, turning her attention to him fully. The intensity was back in her gaze. "Your vessel is weak. The core is unstable. I have felt it." "You felt it?" He raised an eyebrow. "From here, we're 2 sections away." "Distance is relative to feeling," she stated simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the universe. Her expression was unreadable, but the patterns on her temples shifted, a swirling vortex of pale blue. It wasn't an emotion he recognized. "The core requires attention. Now." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Elias felt a familiar surge of annoyance. He was the captain of this rust bucket, the one who kept it flying by sheer force of will and duct tape. He knew its every creak and groan, every failing system. He didn't need some alien telling him what his ship needed, especially not one who seemed to think metal remembered things. "I know what the core needs," he said, his voice sharp. "It needs a replacement I can't afford right now. I'm managing it." "Managing is not healing," Kale countered, her voice steady, refusing to be deflected. She took a step closer to him, and the air between them felt suddenly charged. The subtle scent intensified, and he found himself taking a deeper breath than intended. "The core suffers, as you suffer." His breath hitched, that hit too close to home. He felt exposed, seen in a way he hadn't been in years. He took a step back, putting more space between them. Don't bring that into this. It's about the ship's power core, not. Everything is connected, she interrupted softly, her gaze unwavering. New patterns bloomed across her chest, intricate and delicate like frost on a window. This time the emotion was unmistakable, empathy. It threw him completely off balance. He hadn't expected that from her. Her usual state seemed to be cool observation or fierce determination. Ran a hand over his face, feeling the roughness of his stubble. Look, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine, the core's fine, we'll manage. Let's just focus on getting this repair finished so we can move on. He needed distance, a return to the familiar, sterile world of metal and mechanics. Her presence, her words, chipped away at the defenses he'd built over a lifetime. He wasn't used to being seen, not like this. Not so completely, so effortlessly. It was unsettling, but also strangely compelling. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Her dark eyes held him, drawing him in, promising a depth he hadn't known existed. He was floating in the void, and she was a star, pulling him into her orbit whether he wanted it or not. And the silence that stretched between them was louder than any engine noise, filled with unasked questions and unspoken vulnerabilities. The tension wasn't physical now. It was raw and emotional, hanging heavy in the air. Fine, she finally said, her voice a low murmur. We will finish the repair. She turned back to the welded plating, but Elias could still feel her gaze on him, a warm weight on his back. He knew this wasn't over. Nothing was over with Kale. It was just beginning. He had rescued her from certain death, and now he was slowly realizing she might just be rescuing him too, whether he was ready for it or not. The thought was terrifying, and strangely thrilling. They finished the immediate repairs in silence, the only sounds the whirring of tools and their own breathing. Elias cleaned the site, packing away the equipment with movements born of long habit. Kale watched him, her posture relaxed but still alert. The air felt less charged now, the earlier intensity having dissipated, replaced by a quiet cohabitation. Elias wasn't used to sharing his space, his ship, with anyone, especially not someone so other. But Kale fit into the ship's rhythms surprisingly well, moving with a silent grace that belied her powerful build. She didn't ask questions about his past, about the solitary life he'd chosen. She simply existed beside him, observing, learning, occasionally offering a cryptic comment that made him question everything he thought he knew. He secured the equipment and straightened up, stretching the stiffness from his back. All right, that's done. I'm heading to the core chamber. Want to? He hesitated. He didn't know if she'd want to join him or if she'd prefer to stay in the salvage bay. She didn't seem to need sleep or food or many of the things humans required. Her existence seemed tied to energy, to vibrations, to things he couldn't fully grasp. I will accompany you, Kale said before he finished the question. She moved towards the exit hatch, her steps silent on the metal deck plates. The core calls to me. Elias stifled a sigh. Right, the core calls to her. He still didn't buy her explanations about feeling energy, but she seemed to know things about the ship that she shouldn't. Like the exact location of a hidden coolant leak he'd been searching for days earlier. She'd simply pointed at a blank section of wall and said, "It weeps there." He'd cut open the wall and found it exactly where she indicated. It was unnerving. All right, he said, falling into step behind her. Try not to feel anything that'll get us blown up. She didn't respond, but the subtle shift in the patterns on her neck suggested amusement, or perhaps tolerance for his skepticism. He followed her through the narrow corridors of the ship, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows. The air grew warmer as they approached the core chamber, humming with latent power. Elias could feel the vibration in his boots, a familiar thrum that was the lifeblood of his vessel. When they reached the core chamber hatch, Elias paused, running his hand over the access panel. Okay, standard procedure. Power down secondary systems, cycle the coolant, then I can run diagnostics. Kale placed a hand flat against the cool metal of the hatch. She closed her eyes for a moment, her head tilted. The patterns on her face pulsed slowly, a deep indigo this time. Elias waited, feeling slightly ridiculous standing there while she communed with his power core. Do not power down the secondary systems, she said finally, opening her eyes. The indigo faded, replaced by a sharper, brighter blue. It will cause instability. The core is agitated. It requires balance, not cessation. Agitated? Elias rubbed the back of his neck. It's a fission core, Kale. It doesn't get agitated, it gets hot, or it explodes. It has awareness, she insisted, her voice low and intense. It feels the stress, the imbalance. She looked at him, her expression serious. You built this vessel with your hands, yes. Modified it, he corrected, bit by bit, over years. Then you understand the connection, she said. The vessel is an extension of the self. It feels what you feel. Its illness reflects your own. Elias felt his jaw tighten. She was doing it again, pushing past his defenses, linking the physical state of his ship to his own internal mess. My illness. I'm not sick. Your core is unstable, she stated, her gaze unwavering. It lacks balance. As you do, you push it, you take from it, but you do not give it. Resonance. Resonance, he threw up his hands. What are you talking about? It needs fuel, coolant, and a clean energy flow. It doesn't need resonance. Everything needs resonance, Kale said quietly. She stepped towards the hatch again, her hand still resting on the metal. Let me speak to it. Speak to it, Elias stared at her. How? You gonna sing it a lullaby? He regretted the sarcastic tone the moment it left his mouth. Kale didn't seem offended. The faintest hint of that peculiar, almost smile touched her lips again. Something like that, she murmured. She pressed her entire hand against the hatch, then leaned her forehead against it. Her body became still, her breathing shallow. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin began to intensify, pulsing faster now, and new colors emerged, a soft violet, a shimmering gold. They flowed and swirled like liquid light beneath her skin. Elias watched, mesmerized and utterly bewildered. He could feel a faint warmth radiating from the hatch now, separate from the ambient heat of the core chamber. A low hum, different from the core's thrum, seemed to fill the air, vibrating in his bones. It felt ancient, strange, powerful. He didn't know what she was doing. He didn't understand how she was doing it, but he couldn't deny that something was happening. The air in the chamber felt different, charged with an energy he couldn't identify. He watched Kale, her face serene, lost in whatever communion she was having with his ship's power core. He had rescued an alien, and she was turning out to be far more alien than he could have ever imagined. And somehow, despite the absurdity of the situation, he found himself trusting her. Trusting her strange methods, her cryptic words, her unnerving ability to see past his carefully constructed walls. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was the sheer impossibility of her. Or perhaps, after so long alone, the simple act of connection, however strange, was enough to override his skepticism. The hum in the air grew stronger, deeper, and Elias felt a profound sense of unease, mixed with a strange, compelling curiosity. What was she doing? And what would it mean for him? He stood there, caught between his rational mind and the undeniable reality of the spectacle unfolding before him, waiting to see what would happen next. Kale remained pressed against the core chamber hatch for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a few minutes. The light show beneath her skin reached a peak intensity, her entire form radiating a soft, multicolored glow. The humming intensified, a low thrum that seemed to resonate directly inside Elias' skull. He felt a pressure building in the air, a sense of potential energy coiling within the chamber. It wasn't overtly threatening, but it was immense. He braced himself, unsure of what to expect. Would the core overload? Would the ship shut down? Or would something else entirely happen? Then slowly the intensity began to fade. The swirling colors calmed, the pulsing slowed, and the hum gradually subsided. Kale took a deep breath, pushing herself away from the hatch. The brilliant glow beneath her skin dimmed, returning to the softer, more subtle patterns he was used to seeing. She turned to face him, her eyes bright and clear in the dim light. "It is done," she said, her voice a little breathless. Elias swallowed. "Done, what was that?" "A conversation," she replied, tilting her head. "A realignment. The core understands now. It feels the intention to heal, not merely to survive." She paused, her gaze searching his face. The imbalance was linked to your own fear, your reluctance to fully commit to yourself, to the vessel, to, she trailed off, her patterns shifting again, this time to a delicate rose color around her cheeks. Elias wasn't sure he was imagining that flush of color. He felt heat rise in his own cheeks. To what, to you? Her gaze held his, perhaps. The single word hung in the air between them, charged with a sudden, explicit intimacy. It was more direct, more vulnerable than anything she had said before. Elias felt a jolt go through him, sharp and unexpected. He hadn't dared to think in those terms. She was an alien, a being from another world with abilities he couldn't comprehend. He was just a man adrift, a scavenger trying to make ends meet. A connection between them seemed impossible, but here she was, standing before him, saying, "This, I don't understand," he stammered, feeling completely out of his depth. "What are you saying?" Kale took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. Her scent, that strange, compelling mix of ozone and rain, filled his senses. "I am saying that energy seeks balance. In the core, in the vessel, in the connection between beings." She reached out, not towards the hatch this time, but towards him. Her hand hovered near his chest, and he could feel the faint warmth emanating from her fingertips, the same warmth he'd felt from the hatch. The soft yellow patterns of contentment bloomed across her palm. Your core is guarded, scarred, like the plating we repaired." He flinched internally. Scarred, she saw that. She saw the walls he kept around himself, the emotional wreckage he carried. "It is not weak," she continued softly, her voice barely a whisper now. "Merely afraid to flow, afraid to connect." Her fingertips brushed lightly against the worn fabric of his jumpsuit just above his heart. The touch was fleeting, feather-light, but it sent a tremor through him. Her patterns shifted again, this time to a mix of soft blues and greens, swirling gently. It felt like a question, a hesitant probing. He couldn't speak. His throat felt tight. He wanted to pull away, to retreat behind his usual sarcastic defenses. But her touch, her words, held him captive. She wasn't asking about his past. She was speaking to the present, to the core of him, the part he kept hidden even from himself. You feel that?" he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "I feel your energy," she confirmed, her dark eyes searching his. "It is a powerful energy, Elias, but it is constrained, bound by fear." "It's not fear," he argued, though even to his own ears it sounded weak. "It's protection from getting hurt." "All protection is born of fear," Kale stated simply, her gaze unwavering. Her fingers moved, tracing a slow, deliberate path across his chest, following the contours beneath the fabric. Each touch was a revelation, sending currents of sensation through him. The simple intimacy of it, the quiet focus of her touch, was overwhelming. He hadn't been touched like this in years. Not with this kind of intention, this kind of awareness. You shouldn't be able to do that," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Feel my energy." "Why not?" she asked, her voice soft, hypnotic. Her patterns were a riot of shifting blues, greens, and violets now, a complex tapestry of emotion and sensation he couldn't fully decipher but which resonated deeply within him. "We are both beings of energy, Elias. Yours vibrates differently than mine, yes, but it is there, and it calls to mine." She leaned closer, her face only inches from his. He could see the intricate details of the glowing patterns beneath her skin, the subtle shifts and flows that mirrored, somehow, the turmoil in his own chest. Her scent was stronger now, intoxicating. He felt drawn to her, a primal urge pulling him closer. "It calls to yours," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "It does," Kale confirmed, her dark eyes holding his. "And mine responds." She didn't move, but the air between them thrummed with an unbearable tension. His heart was pounding against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the soft pressure of her hand. He was acutely aware of the difference between them, the smooth coolness of her skin under the glow, the foreignness of her form, the impossible nature of her abilities. And yet, in this moment, those differences felt less like barriers and more like invitations. Invitations to explore, to understand, to connect on a level he had never imagined possible. He took a shaky breath, the air thick with her scent and the residual energy of her communion with the core. He didn't know what came next. His mind was reeling, but his body was responding to her in a way he couldn't deny. The quiet tension, the intimate space between them, her hand on his chest, it was a potent cocktail of fear and desire. He wanted to pull her closer, to feel the impossible reality of her against him. But he was terrified of what that might mean, terrified of the vulnerability she seemed to effortlessly strip away. He met her gaze, lost in the depth of her dark eyes. He didn't know if this was part of her healing ritual, a strange alien custom he couldn't hope to understand, or if it was something else entirely. Something personal. He hoped desperately that it was personal. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words and raw emotion, the faint glow of her patterns the only light in the dim corridor. He waited, his muscles coiled with tension for her next move. He didn't know what it would be, but he knew, with a certainty that resonated through his core, that his life had irrevocably changed the moment her escape pod hit this ship. And looking into her alien eyes, feeling the strange warmth of her hand on his chest, he knew he was about to step into something far more dangerous and far more beautiful than he had ever faced in the cold vacuum of space. Kale's hand remained on his chest, her touch steady and warm. The swirling patterns beneath her skin pulsed with a quiet intensity, a silent conversation Elias couldn't translate but felt deep within him. Her dark eyes held his, reflecting the faint emergency lighting of the corridor. He felt completely exposed, his carefully constructed defenses crumbling under her unique awareness. "Your energy field," she finally said, her voice soft, "is like a storm wall, turbulent, holding back something significant." He looked away, unable to meet her gaze any longer. "Everyone has things they hold back." "Not like this," she countered gently. "This is a fortress, built stone by stone, against what?" "It doesn't matter," he said quickly, trying to inject a note of his usual sarcasm into his voice. It fell flat. "It matters to the core," she stated, her touch lingering. "The core of the vessel and the core of you." He sighed, a long, weary sound. "Look, I appreciate you, trying to understand, but you're not gonna fix me like you fixed that plating or the power core. I'm not broken metal." "No," Kale agreed. "You are not metal, you are liquid fire contained in ice." He blinked, taken aback by the strange, poetic description. "Liquid fire, ice." "The potential is immense," she explained, her patterns shifting to a deeper gold, radiating a sense of potential and warmth. "The passion, the strength, but it is trapped within a shell of coldness, of fear." She lifted her hand from his chest, and the loss of contact felt like a physical ache. He immediately missed the warmth, the strange resonance of her touch. "This shell, it must melt, not shatter. Melting requires warmth, trust." She stepped back slightly, creating a small space between them. The intensity of the moment lessened, but the emotional resonance lingered. He could still feel the phantom warmth of her hand on his chest. He looked at her, this alien woman who saw into him with unnerving clarity. He had saved her life, but it felt increasingly like she was the one doing the saving him from the slow decay of his own emotional isolation. "Trust," he echoed. It was a foreign concept. He trusted his ship's mechanics, his tools, the cold logic of survival. He didn't trust people, not anymore. "Yes," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "The core required trust. It had been pushed and taken from for so long it was afraid to respond. I showed it. It could trust the flow again, that the energy could be shared, not just consumed." She looked at him again, her dark eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "You must learn to trust the flow, Elias, within yourself, and with another." The implication hung heavy in the air. With another, with her. The thought sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through him. Was this what she wanted, a connection, an emotional bond? It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. He was a man who had perfected the art of solitude, who had built his life around avoiding exactly this kind of intimacy. And here she was, an alien, dismantling his defenses with a touch and a few strange words. "I don't know how," he admitted, the words raw and vulnerable. It was the closest he'd come to confessing the depth of his isolation. Kale's patterns shifted again, a wave of soft, reassuring green washing over her shoulders. You know how to build, you know how to repair. This is also a kind of building, a kind of repair. She took another step closer and his heart hammered against his ribs. The air felt thick with anticipation. She reached out again, not to his chest this time, but to his face. Her fingers were cool against his cheek, her thumb brushing gently against his jawline. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into her touch. It felt impossible, unreal. An alien woman touching his face, speaking of trust and connection. It begins with small acts, she murmured, her voice a low hum that vibrated through his skin. Shared space, shared silence, shared vulnerability. Her thumb stroked his cheek again, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down his spine. Like this. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. She was so close now, he could see the intricate dance of light beneath her skin, the subtle shift of patterns in response to his own quiet awe. He could feel the warmth of her hand, the cool, smooth texture of her skin. It was intoxicating. "What happens, if I can't?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Then the ice remains," Kale replied, her expression unreadable but the intensity in her eyes unwavering. "And the fire within, it dims." He didn't want the fire to dim. He hadn't even realized it was there, not truly until she spoke of it, until she saw it. He wanted to feel it, to let it burn, and he had a sudden, overwhelming urge to melt the ice, stone by stone, for her. For this strange, compelling alien woman who saw past the facade and into the core of him. He reached up tentatively and covered her hand with his own. His hand, rough and calloused from years of work, against the smooth, cool skin of her fingers. The touch felt electric. Her patterns responded instantly, a wave of brilliant gold spreading across her hand and up her arm. A low, pleased rumble vibrated in her chest. "Teach me," he said, the words a quiet plea. "Teach me how to melt." A slow, beautiful transformation took place on Kale's face. The serious intensity softened, the patterns around her eyes brightened, and a genuine smile bloomed across her lips, a breathtaking display of shifting light and color. It was the most beautiful thing Elias had ever seen. "It begins now," she whispered, and she leaned in, closing the final distance between them. Her lips, smooth and cool, touched his. The kiss was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't frantic or demanding, but incredibly soft, incredibly deep. Her touch was gentle, exploring, tasting. The scent of ozone and rain intensified, wrapping around him. He could feel the faint, resonant vibration of her energy field mingling with his own. Her patterns pulsed against his skin where their bodies were close, a silent song of connection. It wasn't just a physical kiss. It felt like a merging of something far deeper, a fundamental alignment of energies. He responded instinctively, his arms going around her, pulling her closer. Her body felt light but strong against his, all fluid grace and coiled power. He deepened the kiss, wanting more, needing more of this impossible connection. Her patterns flared brighter, a silent affirmation of shared sensation. The core chamber, the ship, the entire void outside faded away. There was only Kale, her strange, beautiful presence, and the exhilarating, terrifying feeling of his ice melting under the warmth of her touch. Her kiss, her acceptance. The kiss deepened, becoming less tentative, more hungry. Elias felt an answering hunger in Kale, a primal intensity that mirrored his own. Her arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. Her body pressed against his, a revelation of alien form and texture beneath his hands. He felt the cool smoothness of her skin, the subtle ridges and curves that were utterly foreign and yet felt astonishingly right against his own. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed against him where their bodies met, on his chest, his arms, his hips, a silent, vibrant language of desire and connection. He tangled his hands in the strange, fine filaments that adorned her head, discovering they were soft and yielding, unlike anything he'd expected. Her scent, already intoxicating, seemed to fill his lungs with every breath, a heady mix of ozone, rain, and something uniquely her. He groaned into her mouth, the sound raw with need and wonder. Kale responded with a low, resonant hum, a deep vibration in her chest that resonated through him. Her kiss became more demanding, her tongue exploring his mouth with a curious intensity that mirrored her earlier exploration of his energy field. He felt an exhilarating rush of vulnerability, a dismantling of his carefully constructed walls at a speed that should have sent him running. But he couldn't run. He was tethered to her, held fast by an invisible thread of connection that felt stronger than any physical restraint. Her patterns flared, brilliant blues and golds swirling across her skin, reflecting the intensity of their shared sensation. New patterns, intricate and intimate, bloomed on the skin of her chest where it was pressed against his, shapes that looked like celestial maps or swirling galaxies. He was lost in the visual and sensory feast, overwhelmed by the sheer otherness of her, and yet drawn closer than he had ever been to another being. He lifted her slightly, his hands finding the lean strength of her thighs. She wrapped her legs around his waist effortlessly, her body molding against his as if they were designed to fit together. The unexpected intimacy of the position sent a jolt through him. He leaned her back against the cool metal of the core chamber hatch, supporting her weight as the kiss continued, deepening, becoming urgent. Her hands moved over him, exploring the lines of his body, the textures of his jumpsuit. He could feel the strange, low vibration emanating from her fingertips as they traced the scars on his back, the calluses on his hands. It felt like she was mapping him, learning him, not just physically but fundamentally on an energetic level. "Elias," she whispered against his lips, her voice a low hum raw with emotion. The sound of his name spoken by her felt like a caress. This is the flow." "I know," he breathed back, pulling his mouth from hers just long enough to speak. He looked into her dark eyes, saw the reflection of his own stunned face there. Her patterns were blazing now, a chaotic, beautiful storm of light and color. He felt the heat radiating from her body, different from the ship's warmth, a biological heat that called to the fire within him. He kissed her again, fiercely this time, pouring years of loneliness and pent-up emotion into the contact. He wanted to feel everything, to experience the full, overwhelming reality of her. She met his intensity with her own, her body arching against his, her touch becoming more demanding, more intimate. His fingers found the edge of her clothing, the strange, layered panels that weren't fabric but something organic, something that shifted and flowed with her movements. He fumbled with the fastenings, his hands clumsy with haste and desire. Kale didn't wait for him. With a subtle shift of her body, the panels seemed to melt away, revealing the full, breathtaking reality of her form beneath. She was bioluminescent everywhere. Not just patterns, but a soft, pervasive glow that outlined the elegant lines of her body. The light pulsed and shifted, mirroring the intensity of their shared passion. He stared, momentarily stunned by the sheer beauty and alienness of her. She wasn't human, not in the slightest. And yet the sight of her, revealed to him in the dim light of the core chamber, was the most profoundly arousing thing he had ever witnessed. "Beautiful," he murmured, reaching out to touch the glowing skin of her hip. It was smooth and cool, yielding under his touch, and the patterns there swirled like miniature galaxies beneath his fingertips. Kale made a low, pleased sound. "Touch me," she commanded, her voice thick with desire. "Feel the flow." He didn't hesitate. His hands moved over her body, exploring the landscape of alien flesh. The glow intensified wherever he touched, a vibrant affirmation of sensation. Her patterns shifted, swirling into new, more complex designs as their intimacy grew. He felt lost in the sensory overload, overwhelmed by the visual spectacle, the unique scent, the resonant hum of her being, the sheer otherness of her form. And yet, through it all, ran a thread of profound emotional connection, a sense of being seen and accepted on a level he had never experienced. This wasn't just physical. This was a merging of two disparate beings, two lonely souls finding a resonance in the heart of a dying ship. Her touch on him grew bolder, more urgent. She pulled at his jumpsuit, eager to remove the barrier between them. He shed the heavy fabric quickly, eager to feel her skin against his, to see her bioluminescent patterns against his own human form. The moment he was naked, she pressed herself against him, skin to skin. The contrast was startling, the cool, smooth, glowing surface of her against his rough, warm, non-luminous skin. But the sensation was electric. He felt her energy field wrap around him, a warm, pulsating envelope of light and sensation. Her patterns flowed across his body where they touched, leaving faint, tingling trails of light on his skin that faded as soon as she moved. It felt like she was drawing him into her light, incorporating him into her very being. "Here," she whispered, her voice raw. She guided his hands to her waist, pressing them into the soft, yielding flesh there. "Feel the core, the pulse." He felt a deep, rhythmic pulse beneath her skin, stronger than a heartbeat, radiating a powerful warmth. It was her core, the source of her energy, her light, her very being. It was exposed to him, vulnerable, trusting. And in that moment, pressed against her in the heart of his struggling ship, surrounded by the soft glow of her alien form, Elias felt a profound sense of connection, of belonging that transcended species, culture, and the cold, indifferent void. This was the resonance she spoke of. The fire and the ice, meeting and melting in a spectacular, terrifyingly beautiful collision. Their movements became more urgent, driven by a mutual need that had been building since the moment she arrived. The air in the core chamber grew thick with their combined heat and energy. Elias felt himself losing control, surrendering to the primal pull of their connection. Her patterns pulsed faster, brighter, a silent scream of pleasure and need. He could feel the raw power of her, harnessed and focused on him. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, unlike anything he had ever imagined. He was a scavenger, a solitary man on the edges of existence, and he was intimately connected with a being of light and energy, a creature of impossible beauty and profound depth. In the heart of his decaying ship, surrounded by the silent hum of his struggling core, he found a new core, a new source of light and warmth, in the arms of an alien woman who saw him, truly saw him, for the first time in his life. And as their intimacy reached its peak, her light flared, a silent, spectacular supernova that encompassed them both, binding them together in a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, energy merging with energy, fire melting ice, two lonely souls finding resonance in the vast, empty dark. In the aftermath, they lay intertwined on the metal deck plating of the core chamber, the cool surface a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of their bodies. Kale's bioluminescence had softened to a gentle, ambient glow, her patterns shifting slowly, like embers cooling after a fire. Elias held her close, his face pressed against her shoulder, breathing in the scent of ozone and rain, mingled now with the scent of their shared intimacy. His body was exhausted, but his mind was buzzing, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the soft hum of the ship's power core, now a steady, reassuring thrum and the quiet resonance of their joined energy fields. Elias could still feel the faint, tingling sensation on his skin where her patterns had pulsed against him. He ran a hand over her smooth back, feeling the elegant curve of her spine beneath the skin. Everything about her was alien, yet felt so profoundly right. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Kale shifted slightly in his arms, pressing closer. "I am balanced," she murmured, her voice low and content. A wave of soft yellow spread across her back, a silent indication of her state. "The core, it resonates, as do I." "And me?" he asked, feeling vulnerable. What had she done to him? What had they done? She lifted her head, her dark eyes meeting his. The patterns around her eyes glowed with a soft warmth. "Your ice. It has melted, Elias. The fire flows freely now." He felt a lump in his throat. He did feel different, lighter, more present. The constant tension he carried, the wariness, the emotional armor, it wasn't entirely gone, but it was loosened. She had touched him on a level he hadn't known was possible. "I don't understand any of this," he admitted, his voice quiet. "The energy, the resonance. how you can just see and feel all that. Kale rested her head back on his shoulder. It is how we are, my kind. We are connected to the flow of existence. We feel its currents, its vibrations, your kind. You build walls against it. You rely on tools and shields. You disconnect. Survival, Elias said, almost defensively. We learn to survive by being wary, by not feeling too much. Survival without resonance is merely existence, Kale countered softly. It is not life. She paused, and he felt her take a deep breath, her body expanding slightly against his. The scar on the vessel, it was a wound from battle, from a desperate fight. It held the memory of that violence, that fear, your core. It held the memory of your own battles, your own fear. He closed his eyes, the memories flashing briefly behind his eyelids, the loss, the betrayal, the isolation. He had locked it all away, buried it deep, but she saw it. She felt it. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I felt the turbulence," she replied simply. "The resistance, when our energies mingled, it created a channel, a resonance. Your core responded to mine. Your fire responded to my light." He held her tighter. It was overwhelming trying to process everything. She wasn't just an alien woman, she was something else entirely. A healer, an empath, a living conduit of cosmic energy. "So, you healed me?" he asked, feeling slightly ridiculous saying the words out loud. Kale chuckled softly, a low, melodic sound that vibrated through him. "I did not heal you, Elias. I merely reminded your fire how to burn. I provided the warmth for the ice to melt. The rest was you." He didn't know how to respond to that. He had always seen himself as broken, damaged beyond repair. To think that he still had fire within him, that he was capable of healing. It was a revolutionary thought. "Thank you," he said, the words simple but deeply felt. She shifted again, lifting her head to look at him, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "There is no need for thanks. This resonance, it is mutual." Her patterns shifted, a wave of soft pink blooming across her chest. Elias had a feeling he was beginning to understand that color. "Mutual," he echoed, his heart giving a little jolt. "Yes," she confirmed, her gaze unwavering. "Your fire, it resonates with my light. It warms me, it feels like home." The word hit him with unexpected force. Home. He hadn't had a home in years. His ship was just a shell, a means of survival, but with her, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't thought possible. He leaned in and kissed her again, a soft, tender kiss this time, a confirmation of the emotional bond that had formed between them in the heart of the ship. It was a kiss of gratitude, of wonder, of dawning hope. Kale responded with equal tenderness, her patterns shifting to a gentle, pulsating gold. She tasted like ozone and starlight, and felt like everything he hadn't known he was missing. They stayed there for a long time, simply holding each other, the ship's core humming a steady tune, Kale's patterns glowing softly in the dim light. The immediate crisis was averted, the ship was stable, but the real journey had just begun. Elias had melted his ice, found his fire, and connected with an alien being on a level he had never dreamed possible. The void outside was still vast and dangerous, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone in it. He had Kale. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, two resonant souls navigating the darkness, guided by the light of their impossible, beautiful connection. The immediate future demanded attention, even after the profound intimacy in the core chamber. Elias, still wrapped in the lingering warmth of Kale's presence and the strange, comforting hum of the newly balanced core, reluctantly pulled away. They dressed slowly, the return to worn fabric feeling like a barrier after the skin-to-skin contact. Kale's patterns remained soft, a gentle blue and gold indicating contentment and calm, a visual reassurance that the intensity hadn't been a fleeting anomaly. "We still need to make the jump," Elias said, his voice quiet. "Fuel is low, even with the core running smoothly." "Where do we go?" Kale asked, securing the strange, flowing panels around her body. They solidified into their usual form, appearing almost like iridescent scales. Elias hesitated. His usual destinations were familiar salvage points, dead systems where he could scavenge forgotten tech, but those places felt inadequate now. He didn't want to go back to the solitary grind, not with her. "I don't know," he admitted. "My usual spots, they're not safe. Not for you. Not if someone is looking." He still didn't know exactly who or what she was hiding from, but the wrecked escape pod and her general evasiveness spoke volumes. Kale was silent for a moment, her patterns shifting to a contemplative indigo. She walked over to a small viewport, gazing out at the swirling nebula outside. It painted her form in hues of purple and pink, highlighting the intricate flow of light beneath her skin. "My people, we are scattered," she said finally, her voice distant. "Our homeworld consumed." Elias felt a pang in his chest. He knew loss. He knew the feeling of having everything taken away. "I'm sorry." She turned back to him, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "It is the cycle. All things change, all things pass." Her gaze softened as she looked at him. "Some of us sought new places, places where the resonance could be found again." "Resonance," he repeated. "A harmony," she explained, "between the world, the energy, and the inhabitants, a place where life does not merely exist but thrives, where the flow is strong." She paused, her patterns brightening. "There is a legend of a system hidden beyond the charted routes, a sanctuary said to pulse with ancient energy." A legend. Elias dealt in reality, broken circuits, empty fuel tanks, the cold equations of survival. Legends were for spacers who'd had too much synthale, but Kale spoke of it with a quiet certainty that made him pause, and the thought of finding a sanctuary, a place of resonance instead of decay, was strangely appealing. "A legend, huh?" he said, walking towards her. He stood beside her at the viewport, looking out at the infinite expanse. "Got coordinates?" Kale reached out and placed her hand on the cool glass of the viewport. Her patterns flared, and a faint, ethereal light seemed to emanate from her palm, spreading across the glass like frost. Elias watched in stunned silence as a complex set of symbols, glowing with the same internal light as Kale's patterns, began to appear on the viewport's surface. They weren't standard navigation markers, but something else entirely, intricate, interwoven shapes that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "They are not coordinates your charts would recognize," she said, her voice a low hum. "They are signatures of the energy flow, of the path." Elias stared at the glowing symbols. It was another impossible feat, another demonstration of her abilities that defied logic. And yet, the symbols felt right, somehow. They resonated with the quiet energy he now felt within himself. "Can you navigate using signatures?" he asked, feeling a surge of both apprehension and excitement. "I can feel the path," Kale confirmed, meeting his gaze. Her dark eyes were luminous in the reflected light of the symbols. "If you trust me to guide the vessel." Trust, there it was again, the core of everything she spoke of. He had trusted her in the core chamber, trusted her to touch the most vulnerable parts of him, physically and emotionally. Could he trust her with his ship, his life, their future? He looked at the glowing symbols on the viewport, then back at Kale. Her expression was calm, resolute. He thought of the long years alone, the cold emptiness of the void, the slow erosion of his spirit. He thought of the fire she had reignited within him, the sense of belonging she had brought. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "I trust you, show me the way." A wave of brilliant gold washed over Kale's patterns, spreading down her body like liquid sunlight. It was the most vibrant display he had seen yet, a silent expression of joy and profound relief. She turned back to the viewport, her fingers tracing the glowing symbols as if committing them to memory. "It will be a journey," she said, her voice filled with anticipation. "Through less traveled currents, there may be challenges." "I'm used to challenges," Elias said, stepping closer to her side. He reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers closing around her smooth, cool ones. The touch felt familiar now, comfortable, filled with a quiet strength. Kale's patterns pulsed where their hands met, a silent echo of their shared resonance. She turned her head, her dark eyes meeting his, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Good," she whispered. "Then we will face them, together." The core hummed, the faint glowing symbols pulsed on the viewport, and Elias held Kale's hand, standing on the precipice of an unknown journey. He had been adrift for so long, a solitary vessel in a vast, empty sea. Now, with this impossible alien woman beside him, he felt like he was finally setting a course, not just for a hidden sanctuary, but for a new beginning. The future was uncertain, filled with potential challenges and unknown wonders, but for the first time in years, Elias felt a sense of purpose, of hope. His fire was burning brightly, fueled by the light of her presence, ready to navigate the unknown currents of the cosmos and the even more complex currents of their shared lives. Their story was just beginning, two resonant souls intertwined against the backdrop of the stars, seeking a home they had both lost and finding it perhaps in each other. They spent the next cycle preparing the ship for the journey, a quiet choreography of shared tasks that felt surprisingly natural. Elias worked on calibrating the navigation sensors, inputting the general direction Kale indicated based on her signatures. Kale, in turn, seemed to effortlessly locate weak points in the ship's hull, areas of subtle energy leakage that Elias' instruments couldn't detect. She would point a finger at a seemingly innocuous section of plating, her pattern swirling, and say things like, "The vessel is bleeding here," or "This joint, it whispers of fatigue." Elias would check the area and inevitably find a hairline crack or a loosened bolt he had missed. It was frustratingly effective and deeply unsettling. "How are you doing that?" he finally asked one standard cycle, watching her trace glowing lines on a bulkhead with her fingertip, identifying a faulty power conduit buried deep within the wall. Kale looked at him, her patterns a calm blue. "I told you, I feel the flow. The disruption in the energy creates dissonance. It sings a different song than the healthy parts of the vessel." "A different song," Elias repeated dryly. He still struggled with her descriptions, the poetic language that felt so alien to his pragmatic mind. But he couldn't deny the results. His ship was becoming healthier, more balanced under her unique ministrations. They worked side by side, the rhythm of their tasks punctuated by comfortable silence or brief, quiet conversations. The initial intense physical intimacy in the core chamber had settled into a deeper, more constant awareness of each other. There was a comfortable closeness now, a silent understanding that transcended words. They shared meals, Elias eating his nutrient paste, Kale consuming small, luminous energy packets she seemed to generate from within herself in the small galley. They stood together on the bridge, looking out at the stars, the silence between them filled with a quiet companionship that felt more precious than any conversation. Sometimes, when they were alone in the dim light of the ship, Elias would reach out and touch Kale's hand. Her patterns would flare softly at his touch, a silent, beautiful acknowledgement. He was still learning to read the subtle shifts in her light, the different colors and flows that indicated her emotions, her thoughts, her physical state. It was like learning a new language, one spoken not with sounds but with light and feeling. He found himself wanting to learn more, not just about her language of light, but about her past, her people, the world she had lost. She shared fragments, small glimpses into a culture that seemed deeply connected to energy, to the natural world, to a kind of communal resonance that was foreign to his individualistic human experience. She spoke of rituals involving light and sound, of beings who communicated through shared vibrations, of a world where the boundaries between self and environment were fluid. It was a world that sounded both beautiful and terrifyingly fragile. "My people, we were vulnerable," she said one evening, curled up beside him on the worn seating of the bridge, watching the stars drift by. Her patterns were a soft, melancholic silver. "We did not build defenses. We relied on harmony, on balance. When the disruption came, we did not know how to fight." Disruption, Elias asked, his hand resting lightly on her arm. An external force, Kale explained, her voice quiet. Ones who did not seek resonance. They sought to consume, to control the flow. They saw our light as a resource to be exploited. Her patterns pulsed with a sharp, angry red for a moment before fading back to silver. Slavers, corporations. He knew the type. They were everywhere in the galaxy, preying on the weak, exploiting anything they could turn a profit from. It chilled him to think of her people, so focused on harmony and light, facing such brutal pragmatism. "Is that who you're hiding from?" he asked. Kale was silent for a long moment, her patterns swirling with complex, unreadable colors. "They are persistent. They see me as valuable." Valuable? He didn't ask valuable for what. He didn't want to know the details of the horrors she might have faced, or the dangers that might still be pursuing her. He only knew that he would protect her. This alien woman who had melted his ice and shown him his fire. He would face any challenge, any threat to keep her safe. The thought was fierce and protective, a primal instinct he hadn't known he possessed. "We'll find this sanctuary," he said, his voice low and firm. He squeezed her arm gently. "We'll be safe there." Kale leaned her head against his shoulder, her patterns a soft, comforting warmth against his skin. "Together," she murmured. "Together," he agreed. The bond between them deepened with every shared moment, every quiet conversation, every silent touch. It wasn't just physical or emotional. It felt like a fundamental connection, an alignment of their very beings. He was no longer just a lonely scavenger, and she was no longer just an alien refugee. They were Elias and Kale, two resonant souls on a journey through the stars, seeking a home they had found perhaps in each other. The ship, once just a means of survival, now felt like a vessel carrying their shared future, its core humming a steady tune, guided by the light of an alien woman who had shown a broken man how to feel again. Days bled into standard weeks as they navigated the uncharted depths of space, guided by Kale's instinctive understanding of the energy signatures. The journey was not easy. They encountered pockets of turbulent energy that buffeted the ship, ghost-like echoes of ancient conflicts that Kale felt as violent disruptions in the flow. Elias had to push the ship's aging engines to their limits, relying on her guidance to steer clear of gravitational anomalies and phantom debris fields that didn't appear on his scanners. During these tense moments, Kale would stand on the bridge beside him, her hand often resting lightly on his arm or the navigation console, her patterns flaring with vibrant, protective colors. "Here," she would command, her voice sharp, "turn left. The flow is distorted there." Or, "Slow the pulse. We are entering a silence." Her instincts were unfailingly accurate, guiding them through dangers Elias couldn't even perceive. The shared stress of navigating these treacherous paths forged their bond even stronger. In the quiet moments after a difficult maneuver, the tension would dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of relief and shared accomplishment. Elias would look at Kale, her patterns still shimmering with residual intensity, and feel a surge of admiration and gratitude. She wasn't just navigating the ship, she was navigating him, guiding him through the turbulent waters of his own emotions. Their physical intimacy continued, evolving into something deeper and more integrated into their daily lives. It wasn't always confined to stolen moments in the core chamber. Sometimes it was a slow, sensual exploration in his bunk after a long cycle, bodies intertwined in the dim light, his hands learning the landscape of her glowing form, her touch revealing new levels of sensation within him. Sometimes it was a quick, urgent release of tension in the galley, pressed against a bulkhead, the need overriding everything else. With Kale, intimacy wasn't just about physical pleasure. It was an exchange of energy, a merging of light and fire that left him feeling both drained and intensely alive. He learned that her patterns weren't just visual. They had a subtle scent and even a faint sound, a low hum that only he seemed to perceive when they were close. When she was aroused, the ozone scent intensified, her hum deepened, and her patterns pulsed with a raw, primal heat that was unlike any other emotion. When she was content, She smelled like rain and damp earth, and her patterns glowed with a soft, steady light. He was becoming attuned to her in a way he had never been attuned to another human being. One standard cycle, while they were traversing a particularly quiet stretch of the void, Elias decided to push a little further, to ask about the parts of her past she seemed most reluctant to discuss. The disruption, the ones who pursued her. They were in the galley, sharing a quiet moment. Kale was holding one of her luminous energy packets, her patterns a soft, peaceful blue. "Kale," he began, his voice hesitant, "you mentioned the ones who came, who consumed your world. What were they like?" Kale's patterns flickered, the blue momentarily giving way to a sharp, uneasy violet. She was silent for a long time, gazing down at the glowing packet in her hands. "They were empty," she finally said, her voice quiet, filled with a profound sadness. "They had no resonance of their own. They could not feel the flow, so they took it from others. They consumed light. They consumed life." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. The description was chilling in its simplicity. Beings who consumed light. It sounded like a nightmare. "They hunt others like you?" he asked. "They seek resonance wherever they find it," Kale confirmed, her patterns pulsing with that same uneasy violet. "They feed on it. It is their sustenance, their power." She looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with a deep, ancient weariness. "My kind, those who escaped, we are beacons to them. Our light calls to their emptiness." He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Is that why you're hiding?" "In part," she admitted, "to survive, and to protect the potential, the possibility of finding sanctuary, of restoring the flow." "And you think this legend, this hidden system, it's real?" "I feel the echo of its song," Kale said, her patterns shifting back to a determined blue. "Weak but present, a distant harmony." He believed her. He had seen and felt too many impossible things with her to doubt her intuition now. But the implications were stark. They weren't just seeking a safe haven. They were potential bait, drawing predators who fed on light and life. His ship, his home, was now a beacon in the darkness, carrying something incredibly valuable and incredibly vulnerable. "What if they find us?" he asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Kale's grip on his hand tightened. Her patterns flared, a fierce, protective red and gold. "Then we fight," she stated, her voice low and resolute. "Together, my light and your fire." He met her gaze, saw the unwavering determination in her eyes. He had been running from his past, living on the fringes, avoiding conflict. But for her, he would fight. He would unleash the liquid fire she saw within him. He would protect her light with everything he had. The shared vulnerability of that moment, the raw admission of danger, deepened their connection further. It wasn't just about physical desire or emotional intimacy anymore. It was about shared purpose, shared risk, shared defiance. They were two disparate beings, bound together by fate and choice, facing the darkness together. As they continued their journey into the uncharted void, the external tension grew, mirroring the internal complexity of their relationship. The path became more treacherous, the energy fluctuations more violent. Kale's focus intensified, her patterns a constant, complex display of navigation and warning. Elias pushed himself and the ship to the brink, relying entirely on her guidance. One cycle, during a particularly violent energy storm, the ship was thrown off course, alarms blaring. Elias fought with the controls, sweat dripping from his brow. Kale was beside him, her patterns a frantic storm of red and violet, her voice sharp with direction. "Hard to port," she cried, her hand gripping his arm. "There is a tear, the void is unstable." He slammed the stick over, fighting the ship's inertia. A sickening lurch threw them against the consoles. Sparks flew from a ruptured conduit. The lights flickered violently. "Damage report," Elias yelled into the comm. The ship's aging AI responded with a series of critical warnings. "Hull breach in Section 4. Engine output fluctuating. Life support unstable in lower decks." "Kale, go," Elias ordered. Get to the escape pod bay now. He couldn't risk her in this. Kale didn't move. She was staring out the main view screen, her patterns of frozen white, pure terror, intense focus. He couldn't tell. "They are here," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Who the storm?" "No," she said, her voice growing stronger, colder. Her patterns began to shift, a dark, inky black spreading from her core, consuming the light. Elias stared, stunned. He had never seen this before. It was like her light was being extinguished from within. "The empty ones, they have found us." Panic seized him, not for the ship, not for himself, but for her. The creatures who fed on light, and her light was fatting. The conflict had found them just as he had feared. The comfortable intimacy, the quiet moments of connection were shattered by the brutal reality of the galaxy. They were exposed, vulnerable, and Elias knew with a chilling certainty that everything they had built together was now on the line. The tension wasn't just physical or emotional, it was existential. The predators had arrived, drawn by Kale's light, and Elias was faced with the terrifying prospect of fighting for her against an enemy he couldn't even see, an enemy that fed on the very thing that made her beautiful and unique. His core, the fire she had reignited, suddenly felt cold and small in the face of such darkness. The darkness spreading across Kale's skin was terrifying. It wasn't the dimming of light, but an active consumption, an inversion of her usual radiance. It felt wrong, fundamentally against her nature. Elias watched, paralyzed for a moment by shock and fear. The ship groaned around them, the sounds of stress and damage echoing through the hull. "Kale," he yelled, grabbing her arm. Her skin felt cold, the smooth surface replaced by a rough, almost sand-like texture where the blackness had taken hold. "What's happening? Your light." "They are touching the edge of my field," she whispered, her voice strained. The vibrant blue and gold patterns were receding, leaving behind only that chilling blackness. "They are feeding, seeking entry." "Entry into the ship." "Into the flow," she corrected, her dark eyes wide with a terror he had never seen in her before. "Into the resonance. They corrupt it, consume it." He looked around wildly. He saw nothing on the sensors, nothing on the view screen but the violent energy storm outside. "Where are they? I can't see anything." "They are not visible in the way you understand," Kale said, her voice growing weaker. The blackness was spreading rapidly, reaching towards her face. "They are dissonance given form, absence made manifest." Absence made manifest, beings who fed on light. It clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. They weren't physical beings in the traditional sense. They were energy predators. And Kale, a being of pure, resonant energy, was their ultimate prize. He had to do something. He couldn't fight an enemy he couldn't see, an enemy that fed on the very essence of her being. But he couldn't just stand there and watch her light be extinguished. He looked at the navigation console, still sparking from the damage. He looked at Kale, her face rapidly being consumed by the blackness. Her hand was still in his, but the warmth was fading, replaced by that unnatural coldness. He had to disrupt the link, break the connection they were establishing. How? His eyes fell on the ship's primary energy conduit, a thick cable running along the deck plate near the console. It pulsed with raw, unstable power, a dangerous artery of the struggling vessel. It was the core's output, the ship's lifeblood. Kale had spoken of resonance, of flow, of energy. These things, these empty ones, were feeding on her energy field, entering through the shared resonance she had established with the ship, with him. He had to overload the system, create so much chaotic energy, so much dissonance that the link would be severed. It was a desperate, insane plan. It could blow the ship apart. It could kill him. It could kill Kale. But it was the only thing he could think of. Fight fire with fire. Or, in this case, fight absence with overwhelming presence. Fight their sterile consumption with raw, uncontrolled energy. "Kale," he said, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his throat. "I have an idea. It's risky." She squeezed his hand weakly. The blackness had reached her eyes, dimming their light. Risk is part of the flow. He nodded, took a deep breath. I'm going to overload the conduit, send a surge of raw power through the ship. It might break their connection. Her patterns, where they still showed, flickered. It will cause great dissonance, great pain. I know, he said, but it might be the only way. He released her hand, the loss of contact a physical ache. He scrambled towards the conduit, grabbing a tool from his belt, a heavy wrench. It wasn't designed for this, but he didn't have time to get the proper equipment. The conduit was thick, wrapped in layers of insulation. He had to access the bare cable. He started tearing at the insulation, his movements clumsy with urgency. The ship shuddered violently around him. Alarms shrieked. Behind him, he heard Kale cry out, a sound of pain and fatting light that tore at his gut. He risked a glance back. The blackness had covered most of her body now. Only a faint glow remained around her heart, a last bastion of her light. Elia's, her voice was thin, desperate. The dissonance, it is agony. He grit his teeth. He had to do this. He had to sever the connection. He ripped away the last layer of insulation, exposing the thick, pulsing cable. Raw energy hummed around it, dangerous and unstable. He gripped the wrench, feeling the vibration of the cable through the metal. He had to short it out, send a surge through the entire system. It was pure madness. He met Kale's gaze, saw the last vestige of her light in her eyes. He saw fear, but also trust. She trusted him to do this, even if it meant pain, even if it meant annihilation. "Hold on," he yelled, and with a grunt, he slammed the wrench against the exposed conduit. A blinding flash of light erupted, followed by a deafening roar. The ship convulsed violently, throwing Elias across the deck. The air filled with the smell of ozone and burning metal. Every system shrieked, protesting the sudden, uncontrolled surge of power. Elias landed hard against a bulkhead, the breath knocked out of him. His ears were ringing. Lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into near-total darkness, save for the faint emergency strips and the residual glow of the arcing conduit. He pushed himself up, his body aching. He looked towards where Kale had been. The blackness was gone. Kale lay slumped against the console, her form faintly illuminated by the emergency lights. Her bioluminescent patterns were present again, but they were weak, fluttering like dying embers. The vibrant colors were gone, replaced by a faint, silvery white glow that pulsed slowly, erratically. "Kale," he croaked, scrambling towards her. He reached her side, his hand shaking as he touched her cheek. Her skin was cool, but the sand-like texture was gone. It was smooth again, but utterly devoid of its usual warmth and vibrancy. Her eyes fluttered open. The dark depths were dim, the light within them almost extinguished. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her patterns gave a weak, shaky pulse. You severed the link." Are you all right?" he asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. She tried to smile, a weak, heartbreaking attempt. The dissonance, it was severe, but it broke their hold. She took a shallow, ragged breath. "My light, it is dim." "We'll fix it," he said fiercely, gathering her gently into his arms. Her body felt fragile, lighter than usual. The vibrant energy he had come to rely on was almost completely gone. This was the price of his desperate act. He had saved her from the predators, but at what cost? "It is the balance," Kale murmured, her head resting against his shoulder. Her patterns gave another weak pulse, then faded further. The comforting glow was almost gone. Light and shadow, presence and absence. "Don't talk like that," he said, holding her tighter. "We'll get through this. We'll get to the sanctuary. It'll help, won't it? The resonance there." She didn't answer. Her breathing became shallower. The faint glow of her patterns flickered, threatening to go out entirely. Elias felt a surge of raw panic. He had saved her, only to watch her fade away in his arms. He had faced down abstract energy predators, but he was powerless against this, the dimming of her light, the fatting of her life force. "Kale, stay with me," he pleaded, pressing his face against her hair. He could no longer feel the scent of ozone and rain, only the faint smell of burnt metal from the damaged bridge. He had to get her to the sanctuary. He had to find that place of resonance she spoke of. It was their only hope. He looked out the view screen, the energy storm outside beginning to subside, revealing the cold, indifferent stars beyond. He didn't know the exact path, only the direction Kale had shown him. He had to rely on his own instincts now, his own fire, to navigate the remaining distance. He stood up, carefully cradling Kale in his arms. Her body was limp, her light barely visible. He had come to depend on that light, on her guidance, on her presence, more than he realized. He had found a home in her, and now that home was flickering on the brink of disappearing. "We're going home, Kale," he whispered, the words a promise. "To the sanctuary, just hold on." He carried her through the damaged ship, the silence punctuated only by the creak of stressed metal and the unsteady beat of his own heart. The future was uncertain, the danger was still real, but Elias had a purpose now. He had to save her. He had to get her to that place of resonance where her light could be rekindled. He had faced the external threat and survived. Now he faced the internal battle, the fight against the fatting of her very being. And he would fight with everything he had, fueled by the fire she had awakened within him, for the alien woman who had shown him what it meant to truly live. Carrying Kale's near-lifeless form, Elias made his way to the ship's cockpit. The damage from the energy surge was extensive, but the core was still humming, thanks to Kale's earlier realignment. He strapped her into the co-pilot's seat, securing her gently. Her patterns were a dull, almost gray-white, the faint pulse barely visible. He checked her vital signs with a portable scanner, erratic, weak. Her energy field was critically low. He sank into the pilot's seat, his body aching, his mind racing. The ship was crippled, he was exhausted, and the woman who had guided him through the void was fatting beside him. He had to find the sanctuary. He had to find it now. He looked out the view screen. The energy storm had passed, leaving behind a field of distorted space and shimmering echoes of the conflict. The predators were gone for now, driven off by the chaotic surge of energy. But they knew where he was. They knew he carried something valuable. They would be back. He activated the navigation system, his hands moving on instinct. He couldn't use the standard charts. The data was useless in this region. He had to rely on the feel, the faint echo of the song Kale had spoken of. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to sense the currents, the flow. He focused on the feeling Kale had awakened within him, the sense of resonance she had introduced him to. He pushed past his logic, his training, his skepticism, and reached for something deeper. He felt a faint pull, a subtle vibration that seemed to emanate from a specific direction. It wasn't a signal, not in the traditional sense, but a resonance, a harmony in the chaos. He opened his eyes and set a course, overriding the ship's automated warnings and error messages. He was flying blind, guided only by an alien woman's dying intuition and the strange, newfound sensitivity within himself. The journey was a blur of tension and desperation. He pushed the ship's engines to their breaking point, navigating through debris fields and pockets of unstable space using only his gut and the faint, flickering pulse of Kale's patterns as a guide. He talked to her constantly, even though she couldn't respond, whispering promises of safety, of home, of rekindled light. He held her hand when he could, trying to infuse her with his own energy, his own fire. But he knew it wasn't enough. Her light was something unique, something that needed a specific kind of resonance to thrive. Hours passed, cycles turned. The ship was falling apart around him, systems failing one by one, but Elias didn't stop, he wouldn't stop. Then, just as he felt himself reaching the limit of his endurance, both physically and emotionally, he saw it. A faint glow on the view screen. Not a star, not a nebula, but something different. A soft, pervasive light that seemed to push back the darkness of the void. It felt warm, inviting, resonant. "Kale," he whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and hope. "We're here, we made it." He felt a faint tremor in her hand. Her patterns gave a slightly stronger pulse, the dull white gaining a hint of soft blue. Her eyes fluttered open again, and for the first time since the attack, he saw a flicker of her old light in their depths. "The song," she whispered, a ghost of a smile on her lips, "stronger now." He steered the ship towards the light, the aging vessel groaning in protest but responding to his desperate will. As they drew closer, the glow intensified, resolving into a breathtaking view. It wasn't a planet, not in the usual sense. It was a network of colossal crystalline structures, interwoven with fields of shimmering energy, all bathed in a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from within the system itself. Asteroids glowed with inner light. Nebulae pulsed with vibrant colors. It was a place of pure, unadulterated energy, a sanctuary of resonance. The legends, they were real, Elias breathed awestruck. He guided the ship into the system, the atmosphere filled with a gentle hum that resonated deep within his bones. The feeling was overwhelming, a sense of peace, of harmony, of belonging he had never experienced before. Kale's patterns responded instantly, the dull white replaced by a growing tide of vibrant colors. The faint pulse strengthened, becoming steady and strong. He landed the ship in a designated docking bay, a crystalline structure that pulsed with soft light. As the ramp lowered, the air that flowed into the ship felt different, clean, vibrant, humming with energy. Elias unstrapped Kale, her patterns now a kaleidoscope of returning life. He carefully lifted her into his arms and carried her down the ramp, stepping out into the full glory of the sanctuary. The ground beneath his feet wasn't metal or rock, but a soft, glowing surface that yielded slightly to his weight. The air was warm and fragrant, filled with scents he couldn't identify but which felt inherently nourishing. The light wasn't harsh, but gentle and pervasive, illuminating everything with a soft, golden glow. As he stood there holding Kale, her patterns erupted into a display of breathtaking beauty and intensity. Waves of pure, vibrant light flowed across her skin, brilliant blues, golds, greens, violets, reds, swirling and dancing in a silent symphony of life. The dullness was gone. The blackness was gone. Her light was back, stronger and more beautiful than ever. Kale stirred in his arms, her eyes opening fully. They were no longer dim, but blazing with their usual dark intensity, reflecting the vibrant light of her patterns. She looked up at him, a radiant smile spreading across her face, the patterns around her mouth swirling with pure joy. "The song," she whispered, her voice strong now, filled with resonance. "I am home." He gently set her down on the glowing surface. She stood there for a moment, basking in the light, her patterns pulsing with happiness and relief. Then she turned back to him, her gaze filled with an emotion that transcended species and language. She reached out, her hand glowing with vibrant light, and cupped his face. Her touch was warm now, radiating life and energy. "And you," she said, her voice soft, resonant, "you brought me here. You navigated the darkness. You are light in the shadow." He covered her hand with his, feeling the strong, steady pulse of her energy. His own core, the fire she had awakened, burned steadily within him. He had been lost, alone, living in the shadow. She had brought him into the light and in doing so had shown him his own inner fire. "We found it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Together." Kale's patterns shifted, a wave of deep, rich gold spreading across her body, enveloping him in a sense of profound warmth and connection. She leaned into him, her body radiating light and life. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, breathing in her scent, feeling the vibrant hum of her being against his. This was their sanctuary, not just a place but a state of being, a resonance found in the shared light and fire of two souls who had navigated the darkness and found each other. The journey had been long and perilous, filled with loss, fear, and desperate hope, but they had made it. They were home, together. And in that moment, bathed in the golden light of the sanctuary, holding the alien woman who had shown him the true meaning of resonance, Elias knew that their story was just beginning, a new chapter filled with light, life, and the enduring power of an impossible love found among the stars.